For as long as Leo could remember, his life had been filled with luxury, privileges, and unbearable expectations. He was born as the only son of Horacio Carter, one of the most powerful businessmen in the region, owner of a business empire that spanned from real estate to advanced technology. The Carter fortune had grown exponentially over the last 2 decades, and with it, the pressure on Leo to inherit and expand that legacy. The Carter mansion stood majestically on the top of a hill overlooking the entire city. It was a modern palace with large windows reflecting the skyline, surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens and marble statues imported from Italy. Inside the house, every room was a reflection of the family's wealth. Persian rugs, ancient artifacts, and paintings by renowned artists adorned the walls. Despite all this luxury, Leo felt that he didn't belong in that world of gold and marble. Since childhood, Leo had been trained to become the perfect heir. Harold, his father, taught him about business from an early age. Meetings and conversations about investments and stock markets were nothing new in his life. Harold did not allow for mistakes or weaknesses. To him, life was a constant battle in which success was only guaranteed to those who controlled every aspect of their environment. The pressure Leo felt came not only from his father but also from the weight of the family legacy. His grandfather, Fernando Carter, had started the empire from scratch, and his success story had been repeated countless times throughout Leo's childhood. The expectation to live up to his grandfather and father was like a constant shadow that followed him. However, despite having every opportunity within his reach, Leo found no happiness in that world of wealth and power. The endless meetings with executives, the gala dinners with people he barely knew, and the insubstantial conversations about stocks and mergers left him feeling empty. All he yearned for was a simple life, one in which he could be himself, away from the intrigues and manipulations that surrounded his family. Over the years, Leo developed a deep frustration with the life he led. Although his father had provided him with an excellent education at the best universities, where he mingled with the children of other magnates, Leo always felt his life was predetermined. His days passed in an unbearable routine, from the office to formal dinners, and from dinners to investment meetings. The tension between father and son was palpable. Harold expected his son to follow in his footsteps and take total control of the empire, but Leo wanted something different, although he didn't know exactly what. His father's expectations felt like a golden prison. Every decision he made seemed to be questioned, and every step he took was closely watched by his father, who expected perfection at all times. "You can't afford to make mistakes, Leo," Harold would often tell him. "This empire will be yours someday, but only if you learn to be strong. There's no room for doubt, and even less for mistakes." Leo absorbed these words in silence, although inside, he rebelled against the idea of being merely an extension of his father. He wanted more in life, something that would allow him to escape Harold's shadow and live freely. Although he had never openly expressed his desire to leave the family business, his frustration grew day by day. Everything changed one day when Leo, exhausted after a long day of meetings, decided to take a walk through the mansion's gardens. It was a quiet afternoon, and the fresh air helped to clear his mind. As he walked along the perfectly lined paths, he came across Emma, a young woman who worked as a maid in the house. Emma was everything Leo was not accustomed to. She came from a humble family, worked to support her parents and siblings, and had no ambition for wealth or power. For her, life was much simpler. It was about doing her job, helping her family, and finding small moments of joy in everyday things. Her humility and authenticity made her stand out in an environment where everything revolved around appearances. Their first encounter was brief, but something in the way she looked at him, without fear or interest in his wealth, caught his attention. Emma didn't see him as Leo Carter, the heir, but simply as another person. This small detail made Leo feel an immediate connection with her. In the following days, they began to run into each other more often. Emma always greeted him with a genuine smile, and little by little, Leo started finding excuses to talk to her. He would find her in the kitchen or the gardens, always busy, but never too busy to stop for a few minutes and chat. As the weeks went by, their conversations became deeper. They spoke about their lives, their dreams, and their frustrations. Leo told her how he felt trapped in a life he hadn't chosen, while Emma talked about her desire to have a simple and peaceful life, where she could dedicate herself to her family without worrying about money. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not myself," Leo confessed one day as they walked through the gardens. "My life is so planned out by my father that I don't know what I really want. I only know that I don't want to keep going down this path." Emma listened silently, nodding. She couldn't imagine what it was like to live with so much pressure and expectation, but she understood what it meant to feel trapped, even though in her case, the cage was poverty and the constant need to support her family. "Freedom doesn't always come from having or not having things," Emma told him. "Sometimes freedom is simply being able to choose how to live your life, even if you don't have much." Those words resonated deeply with Leo. He felt that Emma had put into words something he himself hadn't been able to express. She represented everything he longed for, a simple life, free from the complications and intrigues of power. Even though Leo knew his relationship with Emma would not be well received by his father, he realized with each passing day that his feelings for her were much deeper than he had imagined. Over time, tensions between Leo and his father began to rise. Harold, who had watched his son with a mixture of pride and control, started noticing changes in his behavior. Leo spent less time at family meetings and more time in the kitchen or the garden, places he used to avoid. One day, while Leo was reviewing some documents in the library, his father entered the room unannounced. Harold had a habit of barging in anywhere in the house as if he owned every space, and in a way, he did. "What's going on with you, Leo?" his father asked in a severe tone. Leo looked up, somewhat surprised by the direct question. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but he wasn't prepared to face it. "What do you mean?" Leo replied, feigning ignorance. "You know exactly what I mean," said Harold, approaching with firm steps. "I've heard that you're spending too much time with that girl, Emma. What the hell are you doing with a maid?" His father's tone was cutting, filled with disdain. To Harold, someone like Emma didn't even deserve to be mentioned in a family conversation, let alone have any kind of relationship with his son. Leo took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't keep hiding his feelings for Emma, but he also knew his father would never understand. "It's not what you think, Dad," Leo began, trying to keep calm. "Emma is different. She's not like the people around us. She makes me feel free." "Free?" his father said, crossing his arms. "You have no idea what you're saying, Leo. You're the heir to all this," he said, gesturing to the shelves filled with books and legal documents. "You can't throw it all away over a whim." For the first time in his life, Leo felt a surge of anger course through him. For years, he had endured his father's expectations and control, but now that he had found something real in his life, he wasn't willing to give it up. "It's not a whim, Dad," Leo replied, standing up. "I'm tired of just being a piece in your empire. I want to live my life my way, and if that means being with Emma, then so be it." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold, who had always been the most dominant man in any room, seemed to be processing his son's words with a mix of disbelief and fury. "If you go down that path," Harold finally said, his voice cold, "you will lose everything. Not only the fortune but also the respect of everyone around you. You'll have nothing." Leo knew his father was serious. He had seen how Harold would destroy anyone who got in his way, and he knew he wouldn't hesitate to do the same to his own son if it meant protecting his legacy. "I don't care about the money or the power," Leo responded, with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I just want to be happy." After that confrontation, Leo knew there was no going back. The break with his father was definitive, and the price he would have to pay for his freedom would be high. However, he was willing to face it if it meant living an authentic life with Emma. That same night, he decided to talk to her about what had happened. They met in the garden, under the moonlight. The fresh breeze carried the scent of flowers, and the silence was broken only by the crunching of leaves beneath their feet. "Emma, we have to leave," Leo said, gently taking her hands. "My father will never accept us. And if we stay here, there will be no peace for either of us." Emma looked at him, her eyes full of worry. Although she felt the same for Leo, she knew that leaving everything behind would not be easy. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be the cause of you losing everything you have." Leo shook his head, holding her hands tighter. "I won't lose anything that truly matters," he replied. "The only thing I want is to be with you, away from all this." Emma nodded, though fear and uncertainty were evident in her face. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that her feelings for Leo were real, and that it was worth fighting for. Together, they decided to flee. Early the next morning, before anyone in the mansion woke up, they packed a few belongings and left a letter for Harold explaining their decision. They knew facing Harold's wrath would be inevitable, but they were willing to do so if it meant living their love without restrictions. Leo and Emma settled in a small town, far from the city and the Carter Empire. The house they rented was modest, a small wooden cabin surrounded by trees and green fields. Despite the simplicity of the place, for Leo, it was the home he had always dreamed of, a refuge where he didn't have to worry about money, power, or expectations. At first, life wasn't easy. Leo, who had grown up surrounded by luxury, had no idea how to do many of the everyday tasks that were now part of his life. He learned to chop wood to heat the house, to care for the garden where Emma planted her own vegetables, and even to cook, something he had never done in his previous life. Emma, on her part, continued working hard, but now with a smile on her face, knowing she was building a life with the person she loved. She dedicated herself to selling homemade bread and jams at the local market, quickly earning the trust and affection of the townspeople. Over time, Leo also found his place in the community. Though initially, the neighbors viewed him with suspicion, as an outsider from a very different world, he gradually earned their respect. He began helping local farmers with their businesses, using the financial knowledge he had acquired under his father's tutelage, but this time applying it in a way that benefited everyone, not just himself. Despite the initial difficulties, Leo and Emma managed to build a life full of love and simplicity, far from the intrigues of power and wealth. Each day, Leo felt more at peace with himself, knowing he had chosen the right path, even if it meant giving up everything he had known. However, they knew they couldn't escape the past forever. A year after their departure, Harold appeared in the small town. Despite everything that had happened, the businessman had never stopped searching for his son, and when he finally discovered where he was, he decided to confront him once again. When Leo saw the luxury car approaching down the dusty road leading to his house, he knew the moment had come. Harold stepped out of the vehicle, impeccably dressed as always, but with an expression that showed something beyond mere anger. "Is this where you've decided to hide?" Harold asked, looking at the modest cabin with disdain. Leo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he observed his father calmly, knowing that this conversation would define the future of their relationship. "I'm not hiding," he finally replied. "I've just chosen to live a different life." Harold walked toward him with firm steps, but unlike the last time they saw each other, his voice wasn't as authoritative. "You've given up everything for this girl," he said, without looking at him directly. "You've thrown away everything I gave you. Why?" Leo looked his father in the eyes, noticing for the first time a vulnerability he had never seen before. "Because I don't want to live your life, Dad. I want to live mine, and I've found it here, with Emma." Harold clenched his fists, clearly affected by his son's words. For years, he had built an empire with the hope that his son would inherit it, but now he saw how that dream was crumbling. "What do you plan to do now?" Harold asked, his voice softer. "Live like a farmer, selling vegetables and working in a garden. Is that what you want?" Leo smiled slightly. "That's exactly what I want," he replied. I don't need anything more than this to be happy." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, Harold, defeated by the reality that he had lost his son, lowered his head and turned back toward his car. "This isn't what I wanted for you, Leo," he said before leaving. "But if it makes you happy, I suppose there's nothing more to say." With those last words, Harold left, leaving Leo and Emma with the certainty that, despite everything, they had made the right decision. After Harold's departure, Leo and Emma remained in silence for several minutes, processing what had happened. Though they knew their relationship with Harold would never be easy, that encounter had left a mark on both of them. Leo felt that his father, for the first time in his life, had seen him as a man, not just his heir. But he also knew that, even though Harold was leaving resigned, this was not the end of their story. The months passed quickly, and Leo and Emma continued building their life together. The small garden they had started as a means of self-sustenance grew more than expected. Emma devoted herself to selling her products at the local market, and the quality of her jams and bread attracted attention from customers in nearby cities. Soon, what had started as a small market stall became a growing family business. Leo, on his part, began using his management skills to help local farmers and small merchants improve their businesses. Though some initially hesitated to accept advice from someone who came from such a powerful family, they soon realized that Leo had good intentions and a genuine desire to contribute to the community. Their lives had taken an unexpected turn, and both felt more fulfilled than they had ever imagined. But the past continued to haunt them, and although Harold hadn't returned, Leo knew that his story with his father wasn't yet over. One day, 2 years after their departure, Leo received a letter. It was from his father. He didn't open it immediately. He remembered the words from their last encounter, and he wasn't sure he wanted to confront old ghosts again. But Emma encouraged him to read it. "It's time to close that chapter, Leo," she said, placing a cup of tea on the table in front of him. "Whatever he has to say to you, it's better to know." Leo nodded, and with some nervousness, broke the seal on the letter. The words he read were not what he expected. Harold wasn't asking him to come back or reprimanding him for choosing a different life. Instead, he wrote about the illness that had been silently consuming him over the past few months. "I'm getting old, Leo," the letter began. "And over the years, I've learned that power and money aren't everything. I've lost something far more valuable, you. I regret trying to control you, and while I know it's too late to change things, I'd like to see you one more time, not to talk about business, but to get to know the man you've become." The letter ended with a plea. Harold wanted to meet his grandson, if Leo and Emma had had children. It was a humble request, far removed from the imposing man who had dominated every aspect of Leo's life for so many years. Leo placed the letter on the table and sighed. Emma, who had been watching him in silence, looked at him with concern. "What does it say?" she asked, moving closer. "My father is ill," Leo replied softly. "He wants to see me. And, he also wants to meet our son." Emma looked at him with tenderness. Their son, Benjamin, was only a year old but had already become the center of their world. He was a lively child who filled the house with laughter and play. "What do you plan to do?" she asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. Leo remained silent for a moment, reflecting on the situation. He knew his father had made many mistakes, but he also knew that time was a finite resource, and perhaps this was the last chance they would have to reconcile. "I'm not sure," he replied, looking at Benjamin, who was playing on the floor with his stuffed bear. "Part of me wants to go, but another part fears that nothing has changed." "Sometimes, people change when they realize time is running out," Emma said softly. "If you don't try, you might regret it later." Leo looked at her, knowing she was right. The resentment he had felt toward his father for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by something deeper, the desire to close that chapter of his life in peace. Weeks after receiving the letter, Leo decided to travel to the city to see his father. Emma accompanied him, along with their son, Benjamin. Although the journey was long, Leo's anxiety grew as they approached the imposing mansion where he had grown up. Upon arrival, everything was exactly as he remembered: the perfect gardens, the massive windows, and the sense of coldness that had defined much of his childhood. They were greeted by Ignacio, the family butler, an elderly man who had served the Carter family for decades. Leo hadn't seen Ignacio since he had left the house, but the butler greeted him with a mix of warmth and respect. "Your father is waiting for you in his study, Mr. Leo," Ignacio said, leading them through the long hallways of the mansion. Harold's study was one of the most intimidating places in the house, with shelves filled with ancient books and portraits of Carter ancestors adorning the walls. When Leo entered, he saw his father sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the horizon. Harold was visibly aged. His hair, once entirely black, was now streaked with gray, and his face showed the marks of time and illness. Hearing Leo's footsteps, he slowly turned around. "Son," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I knew you'd come." Leo said nothing at first. Seeing his father so weakened affected him more than he expected. He remembered the powerful man who had dominated every aspect of his life, and now he saw him as a vulnerable old man. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked, moving closer. "I've had better days," Harold replied with a bitter smile. "But I'm glad to see you." Emma entered the study, carrying Benjamin in her arms. When he saw the child, Harold fell silent, his eyes filling with tears. It was the first time he saw his grandson, and in that moment, something in him seemed to change completely. "So, this is Benjamin," he said, his voice trembling. "He looks a lot like you when you were a boy." Leo looked at his father and then at his son. There was something profoundly moving in that encounter, and at that moment, he knew he had made the right decision by coming. Though they could never erase the past, Leo knew the future was still in their hands. Over time, the relationship between Leo and Harold improved. Although the wounds of the past didn't disappear entirely, both worked to heal their differences. Harold, weakened by his illness, decided to retire from the business, allowing Leo to continue his life in the countryside, free from the expectations that had once suffocated him. Leo and Emma, for their part, thrived in their small community. Emma's business grew, and soon they opened a small shop in town where they sold their products to an increasing number of customers. Benjamin grew up surrounded by love and freedom, without the pressures that had once marked his father's life. Harold, who spent his final years far from power and ambition, became a loving grandfather, enjoying simple moments with his grandson and son. He learned that true legacy was not in business or wealth but in the relationships we build and the people we love. Years later, after Harold's death, Leo and Emma continued with their lives, knowing they had built something far more valuable than any empire, a united family based on love, understanding, and freedom. The years following the reconciliation between Leo and his father Harold marked a new era for the Carter family. Although wealth and power remained part of their history, these elements took a back seat to the new priorities that guided their lives: love, family, and community. After Harold's death, Leo and Emma continued to build their life in the countryside. Their small shop of local products grew exponentially. What had started as a stall in the village market became a reference point for the inhabitants of nearby villages. Emma's homemade jams, breads, and preserves became a huge success. But beyond the products, the essence of their business lay in the authenticity they projected. Each jar of jam and each loaf of bread was filled with the story of their family's struggle and perseverance. Leo also played a key role in the business expansion. He used his business knowledge to create a solid supply chain that connected small farmers in the region with their shop. Little by little, he began offering fresh, high-quality products through his network of contacts. Additionally, Leo implemented a cooperative system with local farmers, ensuring they also benefited from the sales, something rarely seen in the competitive urban business world. Benjamin, their son, grew up surrounded by love and values. Although Leo and Emma had the means to send Benjamin to private schools in the city, they wanted him to have a childhood more connected to nature and simplicity. They chose to enroll him in the local school, where Benjamin mingled with the village children. There, he learned not only traditional subjects but also the importance of empathy, solidarity, and respect for others. As Benjamin grew, he showed a strong character and an insatiable curiosity about the world. He was an adventurous child who spent hours exploring the nearby fields and rivers, accompanied by his village friends. Leo and Emma taught him the value of honest work and the importance of fighting for what you want. Although Benjamin was aware of his father's past and the wealth that had once belonged to his family, he never showed interest in that life. For him, the most important thing was the freedom he had known since he was young. However, as the years passed, Benjamin began asking questions about his grandfather Harold and the family legacy. Though his parents had spoken about their past, they had never gone into too much detail about the empire his grandfather had built. One afternoon, as Leo worked in the shop, Benjamin approached him, his eyes full of curiosity. "Dad, why don't we talk more about Grandpa Harold?" Benjamin asked, sitting on one of the chairs by the counter. "You always talk about him as someone very important, but you've never told me everything he did." Leo paused, thinking about how to answer. He knew his son had a right to know more about his history, but he also knew that history was filled with hard lessons. "Your grandfather was a very powerful man, Benjamin," Leo began. "He built an empire from scratch, and for many years, he believed that money and power were the most important things. But he also made many mistakes. By the end of his life, he realized that the most valuable thing wasn't the empire he had created, but the people he loved. And that's something I learned from him." Benjamin listened intently, absorbing every word. "And you? Do you regret leaving all that behind?" Benjamin asked. Leo smiled and shook his head. "Never. I've learned that true wealth isn't in money or power, but in the freedom to live as you want and the family you build. And that's what I want you to learn, Benjamin." The boy nodded, understanding what his father was trying to convey. From that day on, Benjamin became more interested in his family's history, not from the perspective of power but as a lesson about life's priorities. As the family business grew, so did Leo and Emma's influence in the community. Over time, they became key figures in the village's economic and social development. They not only helped local farmers and artisans but also promoted initiatives to improve the quality of life for the residents. One of the biggest projects they undertook was building a high school in the village. Until then, local children had to travel to the city to continue their studies, which wasn't always possible for the poorest families. Leo, with the help of some city contacts, raised funds for the school's construction. Many neighbors joined the project, contributing labor and materials. The school was a resounding success, allowing many young people in the village to continue their studies without having to leave their homes. Emma, for her part, got involved in creating educational programs focused on entrepreneurship, teaching young people how to develop small local businesses and manage resources efficiently. This not only benefited the students but also boosted the village's economy. Over the years, the village prospered, and many families found new opportunities thanks to Leo and Emma's leadership. However, it wasn't all easy. As the business grew and their family's influence increased, external challenges also arose. Businessmen from the city began showing interest in the lands around the village, looking for opportunities to buy land and build tourist complexes. The promise of quick money and interest in the region became a threat to the peace Leo and Emma had worked so hard to protect. The lands surrounding the village were valuable for their natural beauty, and many investors wanted to capitalize on them. One evening, as they were having dinner at home, Emma mentioned a rumor she had heard at the market. "They say some businessmen want to buy the land south of the village to build a luxury resort," Emma said with concern. "If that happens, everything we've worked to protect could disappear." Leo frowned. He knew outside pressure had always been present, but he had never felt it was so imminent. "We'll have to meet with the village leaders and make sure they don't sell their land," Leo said, determined. "This place is our home. We can't let them destroy it for money. That same week, they organized a meeting with the local farmers and landowners. Most were reluctant to sell, but some, tempted by the promise of large sums of money, began questioning if holding on to their land was truly worth it. Leo spoke during the meeting, appealing to the sense of community and the importance of protecting what they had built together. I understand that money may seem like an easy solution, he said. But if we sell our land, we'll lose more than we gain. This place is more than just property. It's our history, our community, and we can't put a price on that. Emma also spoke, reminding everyone that their prosperity hadn't come from material wealth but from unity and joint effort. In the end, most farmers decided to stand firm and not sell their land. Though the businessmen continued pressing for months, the community resisted, thanks to Leo and Emma's leadership. That episode further reinforced the sense of unity in the village and reaffirmed the importance of protecting their roots from external threats. Meanwhile, Benjamin continued to grow and mature amid these changes. He had become a strong, determined young man with a deep sense of justice and social responsibility. Though his childhood had been marked by the tranquility of the countryside, his adolescence brought new challenges. As Benjamin approached adulthood, he began to wonder whether his future lay in the countryside or if, like his grandfather, he was destined to explore other horizons. Although he loved life in the village, he also felt an increasing curiosity about the outside world. One afternoon, while walking through the fields with his father, Benjamin finally expressed his concerns. "Dad, I've been thinking," he began, looking at the horizon. "I know this place is important to our family, but I also feel there's something more for me out there. I want to see the world, learn, and discover new ideas." Leo listened attentively, not interrupting. He knew this moment would come, and though part of him wanted Benjamin to stay, he also understood that his son had the right to explore his own path. "I don't want you to think I'm rejecting what we've built," Benjamin continued. "But I feel there's something out there, something I need to discover for myself." Leo nodded, recalling the words his father had told him many years ago, when he himself had decided to leave the Carter Empire. "I understand, Benjamin," Leo replied. "We all need to find our own path. I did it, and though it was difficult, it was the best decision I ever made. If you feel the need to see the world, I'll support whatever you decide." Benjamin smiled, grateful for his father's support. He knew it wouldn't be easy to leave the village, but he also knew he wasn't abandoning his family, but rather seeking his own future. Over time, Benjamin decided to study at a university in the city, where he focused on economics and rural development. His goal was to learn new ways to support communities like his own, using the knowledge he gained to improve people's lives in rural areas. During the years he spent in the city, Benjamin never forgot his roots, and each time he returned to the village, he brought new ideas and projects to improve the community. Meanwhile, Leo and Emma continued to strengthen their business and their community. They opened new stores in nearby villages and formed alliances with other local cooperatives, expanding their influence and reaching more people with their products. The Carter family had become an example of how success wasn't always tied to power or money but to the ability to create positive change in people's lives. Eventually, Benjamin returned to the village, determined to continue the work his parents had begun. He used his knowledge and experience to modernize some aspects of the business while keeping in mind the fundamental values that had guided his family for so many years. Under his leadership, the community prospered even more, and Benjamin became a bridge between the rural and urban worlds, demonstrating that it was possible to build a life based on the balance between tradition and progress. Years later, the Carter family celebrated their success not only as entrepreneurs but as a united family that had overcome the obstacles of the past and found their own path to happiness and prosperity. Harold's legacy, though complex, had served as a valuable lesson on life's true priorities. And now, that legacy had transformed into something much greater, a story of redemption, love, and personal triumph.